I think the first thing that's important for anybody on the client side or on the agency side is to recognize that the client has numerous assets at their disposal for strategic initiatives. They include the product, the manufacturing, the distribution, the brand, and the consumer, or the customer, excuse me. All of those are assets that can be used to create a strategy. In addition to the assets, there are parameters, constraints on any strategy. And the parameters are the client itself, the enterprise, its culture and its budget, the competitors of the client or the enterprise, the structure of the category, and again, the customer. You have assets and you have constraints. They constitute the situation. You address the situation with the assets and the constraints, and then the theoretical knowledge or the codified expertise that comes from consultants or academics. Between the theory and the reality comes the solution. And the solution is always very, very particular. In this particular case, my presentation, I was asked to address this topic. So, I culled from my assets and my readings, I pulled together things that I thought were going to be particular to this particular solution. And this, and like everything else I do, you take general things and make them particular. So I would advise all of you to think broadly about the assets at your disposal and think in great detail about the constraints that you face, and then go back to all of the resources that you have, academic or consultative, and then apply the theory to the reality to come up with a solution. First and most important lesson, as far as I'm concerned, is that CRM, like any other technology, is first of all an enabling technology. And in the question before this audience, it's only one of 5 defensive strategies. And that's very, very important to recognize, because you should not overestimate what any particular discipline can do, and you should not forget the other strategies at your disposal. If you look at strategies in terms of how severe the threat is, then there are certain the strategies get more and more severe as the threat gets more and more severe. And the strategies you will find arrayed in the columns. The resources that you have to implement those strategies are laid out in the rows: the customers, the product, your potential partners, and your potential rivals themselves. In this case, I've labeled the rivals upstarts. And then there are certain other tools that you can use, like public relations and the law. In terms of the role that CRM can play in any of these strategies, it concentrates in the containment area, because what CRM can do best is retain your current customers. So I've highlighted the upper left-hand box as the place where CRM plays its greatest role. At some other point, we can talk about the other strategies. The fact that it has that one particular place does not mean that it's small in its potential importance. Quite the contrary. That at that location, under a competitive threat, the containment phase is the most important phase, because A, you get an early warning system from your current customers. B, before the competition or the threat becomes too serious, you have available to you most of your lower cost and most effective options. Moreover, the rivals are likely to be immature. And finally, the customers themselves are your first line of defense. So the fact that CRM seems to have a small footprint does not mean that it has a small impact. Quite the contrary. Because of its particular location, CRM, with its small footprint, has a very big impact. Now, when you're thinking about retention, it's almost impossible, and nobody really wants to retain all of your customers, because some of your customers are worth more than other customers are. And this chart, the Wunderman Loyalty Framework, this is just one way of designing a segmentation scheme. The arrow to the left, to the right, in green, that's called value. It's money. How much money is that customer delivering to the company? The blue arrow, called breadth, is how many different products that same customer is buying from one company. And the red arrow is commitment, which is the emotion that the customer has toward the company. Now, what's interesting about this, and this again, this is not a sales pitch for Wunderman, and the reason I put it in this box is because there are other ways of doing segmentation schemas. This is the one that I'm most familiar with. What's interesting and problematic is that red line that's called commitment. Most companies can't quite get a good measure on commitment. They know how much money the customer is contributing. That's behavioral, and that can be tracked. With good CRM, they also know the breadth of the customer's purchasing, how many different lines of business or how many different products within the same line of business that customer is purchasing. What's very much a mystery is the red arrow, which is the commitment level. And one of the things that Wunderman did to make this framework an operating reality is we devised a methodology for measuring commitment. And I'll show you a little bit more about that methodology in a moment. But it all boils down to 4 simple questions. Would I miss the brand if it went away? Would I recommend it to somebody else? That is, am I willing to put my reputation on the line by recommending this product to somebody else? Would I buy it again? The likelihood of repurchase. And finally, would I pay a premium for it? Now, those 4 questions are relatively easy to get answers to. And one of the reasons we boiled it down to 4 questions is because we wanted to make it easy for our clients to operationalize those 4 questions and get answers to those 4 questions in the context of their CRM system. So that now we had all 3 legs of the framework in place. The money, the number of products, and the commitment. Now I'll tell you a little bit about how we went about doing this. The components of this commitment are 3. How the product performs, how the customer is treated by the company, and finally this question of community. Product has 2 dimensions. Does it meet my needs? And does it do better than the competitor products do? The customer treatment dimension also has 2 sides. Actually, it has 3 sides. But fundamentally, it's, do they know me when I call them up on the phone or when I write them a letter or when I visit their website? And that's the reactive side. And do they treat me well? Do they know me and do they treat me well when I am proactive with them? In other words, does the company react well to a problem or to a need that I have? The other side is proactive. Does the company show me that it wants its business? Is it soliciting my business? Don't do too much of the latter if you can't do the former. The former is much more important to customers. When they call and they've got a problem, doesn't matter how much you solicit their business, if you can't answer their problem or if you can't help them, their treatment scores are going to get low. And the third element, and this I should have prefaced, this research is based on North American research. The third element is community. Certain brands attract the community. Those communities can be of 2 types. They can be real communities where customers actually get together. Harley Davidson is an example. Or they can be virtual communities where people feel an affinity toward each other without actually coming into contact with each other. And I would suggest that owners of the Apple iPod feel themselves part of a community without actually getting together. So those are the three building blocks of a customer's commitment to a company. The performance of the product, the way the customer is treated, and do they feel themselves in a community. And depending upon how well you score on those three variables, the net result is it's just a brand I use. It's a little, you get preference when you get a response that says, I prefer to use this whenever I can, and you're committed when you're willing to pay a premium price for it. This was not terribly complicated research, and its intention was to create a methodology to identify that third leg of the loyalty framework, that commitment level. One of the nice things about having a framework is that you are then able to do segmentation analyses, and you can take your customer base and organize them into segments. Now, in this case, we just took each of the three axes and divided them into high-low. And from the high-low on the three axes, 2 by 2 by 2, you get 8 segments. My only point here is that not all of these segments are as valuable as others. Not all of these segments have the same level of risk of leaving the company. So if you can segment your customer base, you have a much better idea of where to target your investment so that you can retain the customers that are most important to you. And I say most important and not necessarily most valuable, which is a point I'm going to come back to later. Now, okay, so that's the segmentation schema. And then the question is, when you apply retention techniques, you apply them to different segments, not all segments. And I'll just make the point that somebody can be paying you a lot of money, but they could cost a lot of your money to sustain that relationship. A very demanding customer. The question is how much profit does the customer generate, not how much revenue. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to figure out which of the profitable customers to invest in. Now, we mentioned that CRM can play an important role in the containment area, and it can support all of the major containment strategies: rewarding customers, cross-selling them, integrating them into your business, and relating to them. And Rajat will talk a lot more about the nature of creating relationships. Here, in the first one, I've just listed all the typical types of reward programs there are. And just for your convenience, and it was just to make sure that I had captured 80% of the kinds of incentive programs that are available to reward loyal customers. Again, any of these programs would be applied differentially to the different customer segments depending upon their value to you. CRM can also play a huge role in cross-selling. Now, here, this is a methodology that we use to determine whether or not a cross-selling effort is even worthwhile to begin with. This is a basic data analysis where you combine two customer groups, you find the customers that are shared by both customers, and then you model both ways. You use data to model. You find look-alike customers in line of business number B, and they look like the dual customers, and therefore they're good prospects for the acquiring company to go target. And conversely, you can model the behaviors of the dual customers in LOBA and therefore figure out what offers to make to customers in line of business labeled B. I don't want to get into the details here. The point is that good data analysis running on top of a CRM system can help you not only identify, but dimensionalize whether or not there's a cross-selling opportunity. And once you've dimensionalized it, figure out what to offer those customers, who they are, and what to offer them to make that potential real. So that is now, as you can imagine, cross-selling is hugely important to retention, because the more you're buying from the same company, the less likely you are to leave. Data analysis running on top of a good CRM system can give you the first way of understanding whether that's even feasible, and if it is feasible, what the likely returns are going to be. CRM is also a way to integrate customers into your enterprise, and this is true both with consumers and it's true with businesses. I've just listed here a range of ways that customers, whether consumers or businesses, get locked in to a company, in most cases, by some kind of electronic communication. It can be, on the consumer side, if I have an electrical bill, I can arrange to have my bank pay that bill directly. So I'm locked in to that supplier. My bill is being paid automatically. At the other end of the spectrum, on the business side, there are a large variety of data-driven, usually electronic means of communication that lock suppliers into manufacturers. And there's just electronic data interchange and web services and just-in-time inventory and supply chain management and build-to-order manufacturing. Those are all ways of electronically locking in people, whether they're consumers or businesses. CRM is a huge help in terms of implementing that kind of electronic lock-in. Finally, in terms of what CRM can do, and again, Rajat will go into this in more detail, relationships are about creating dialogue. So the role of CRM in this instance is, first of all, to get the permission to have that dialogue. And once you've got the permission, you need to tailor the communications, the content of the communications, and the cadence of the communications, the tempo, the pacing of the communication, to the customer's past purchases and their demographics and their life stage, or the customer's needs at different stages of the purchase consideration path, or different stages of the ownership life cycle. I can tell you when you're selling capital assets to big companies, when you're selling a $5 million IT installation, that consideration path can go on for 18 months. So that question of content, and by the way, during the 18 months, that customer's needs change in terms of what information they need and in terms of what kind of communication they're expecting. So CRM has a huge role to play in determining the content and the cadence of the communication. It also has a huge role to play in what delivery channels you use to implement that communications. And again, that the choice of channels depends on customer specifics, the customer needs, their preferences, what are the best practices in the category, and also what the channel is capable of doing. And finally, in terms of creating a dialogue, CRM is hugely important in terms of collecting the right data, how the data is structured, how it's defined, whether it's accurate, fresh, complete, etc., whether your permissions are in accordance with your privacy policies, which is a huge issue in the U.S. and the EU, and finally, whether you're acting in a way that engages the customer's trust. And that usually means giving them notice, consent, access, accountability, and redress for the information that they give you. The management of customer information is becoming a very, very important part of not only customer relationship marketing, but all retention marketing. Now, all of that's fine, but there's a huge bias in that. Most of the time, people use all of these tools to solidify relationships with their best customers. The problem is that most competitors attack from underneath. They do not attack your best customers. They attack your less desirable customers. Now, in this particular chart, the blue line is the establishment companies, the incumbents, the companies who are making incremental progress, getting better year by year. They're making their products better and better every year. And the red line are the upstart companies who come in with a new technology. And the issue is that dotted line, that's the amount of performance that your customers can absorb or utilize. And the established companies will keep improving their product and making it better and getting ahead of their customers. That's how they keep their customers, by continually offering them a better and better product. The problem is that as their product becomes better and better, there's a group of customers for whom that product is becoming too good for their needs. The product improvement doesn't take a long time, but it goes beyond what the low-end customers require. So then a company that can come underneath and can compete effectively for your low-end customers, even if their product doesn't perform as well, but as long as their product suffices for the needs of their low-end customers, and if they can give it to them more cheaply, more conveniently, or faster, those competitors are going to make a run at your low-end customers. Now, this is almost essential for them too, because even the disruptive incumbents will ultimately pursue a path of incremental improvement. So eventually, that red line is going to cross that dotted line, and they're going to be able to get your low-end customers. And that's most of the problem with the conventional thinking. The conventional thinking keeps focusing on the most valuable customers, but that's not where the competitors attack. So the question then becomes, what should I do if I'm going to use preventative CRM in a defensive mode and try to preempt it? What should I preempt? And one of the things that I think everybody needs to think about is not protecting their best customers, but protecting their less valuable customers who are in important locations. Now, the question is, how do you identify which customers those are? Well, I could go back. I'll go back. In the center, close to the center axis, where you have low-value customers, where they're not buying a lot, or they're not committed to you a lot, rather than look at the high end, look at the low end. And the question then becomes, and here we're going to borrow something from the technology area, the competitors are likely to find niches. This is a technology diffusion chart. The traditional one is smooth, but there's this big gap in the middle between early adapters and the early mainstream. And one of the ways that technology companies typically cross that gap is they find niche markets in the mainstream that they will serve well, and who will adopt their product, their technology, not because it enables something that precedes the technology. It enables butterfly collecting, or it enables classical music, or it enables some niche interest that the technology is a big help to. And I would suggest that one of the things to think about, instead of talking about this early majority, think about this as your mainstream customers. What are the segments in your mainstream customers who you are over-serving, whom your products are beyond what they require? Those customers are going to become vulnerable. And so then the question becomes, well, if I'm over-servicing some customers with a product that goes beyond their needs, is there a strategy for less? And I did look around, and I did try to find a strategy that would enable anybody to go less. Now, the TRIZ methodology is something that was invented by the Russians. And it's a Russian acronym for the theory of inventive problem solving. And it was designed by some product engineers and manufacturing engineers. And the way this works, it's a very interesting methodology. You take your specific problem, then you find the TRIZ general problem that's most applicable or most analogous to your specific problem. Then you go to the TRIZ solution, the general TRIZ solution, and then you drop down again to find your specific problem. Now, it's natural that a bunch of product engineers would invent this kind of thing. And there are like 40 principles for solving technical contradictions and 4 principles for solving physical contradictions. It's quite a little science. One of the advantages in our context is because it breaks things up, as product engineers are likely to do, it reveals strategies of subtraction, things that you can take away from your product that make it more interesting. And I'll show you an example, a well-known example of subtraction. The Sony Walkman subtracted the speakers from the tape recorder. And by that subtraction, it enabled Sony to apply all its expertise in miniaturization. But that's fundamentally a subtraction strategy. So my take on the role of CRM and the turning it upside down is on purpose, is that when you think strategically about using CRM in a preventative way or a preemptive way, one of the most important things to think about is to protect what are your currently unattractive customers, but they could be very attractive to a competitor. And once they penetrate the main body of your customers, you're already in big trouble. So you look for customers who are overserved, less profitable, and in your mainstream.